Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank, and today we're teaching you how to write an FRQ for the AP test.
Writing an A+ FRQ will make you one step closer to earning that 5.
So let's get started. Alright Abe, walk us through another one of your fabulous PowerPoints.
Buckle up, Frank. I'm sure you're excited. So we'll first talk about how the FRQ is graded. You get 1 point for having a thesis, and you need to make sure that your thesis does not merely restate the question. You must make sure that your thesis discusses what you're going to argue in your essay. So you have to take it one step farther, even if you do use some of the words from the question in your thesis. Make sure that it's clear and specific. You get 2 points for support for your argument, and that's basically just incorporating in specific historical examples into your essay. You get 2 more points for periodization, and periodization is simply talking about how things changed, but also how they stayed the same. So it's analyzing how the historical period changed from before and after the event that they're talking about. And you get a final point for synthesis, and I'll discuss synthesis in a later slide. So we got these wonderful pictures for you to look at while I talk about the intro. The first thing you want to have in an intro is a hook. You want to grab the reader's attention.
Unlike this PowerPoint, which grabs nobody's attention.
These pictures function very well to grab attention. Anyways, the second thing you want to have is you want to provide some background information on the issue you're describing. So since we were talking about the Mexican-American War in our example, we're talking about the causes of the Mexican-American War and just general information about it. You want to define some key terms. Any term in the prompt that is sort of abstract and someone who hadn't taken APUSH wouldn't know, you want to define it and provide a definition.
So if your prompt was about America's role in globalization, you definitely want to define globalization.
Exactly. And then fourth and finally, you want to have a thesis, and like I said, do not merely restate the question. Yes, The American Pageant is a wonderful textbook filled with wonderful metaphors that enhance the reading.
Right, yada yada yada. Keep
Also
going,
confusing
Abe.
you. Anyways, the body of the essay. You want to group your evidence into 3 categories. So all that evidence that you've written down beside the prompt that was like some random words in the prompt made you think of it, you want to group them into 3 categories so you can argue them in a coherent essay. So each evidence category requires a separate paragraph, and here's how you structure each paragraph. First, you have a topic sentence. You say what you're going to discuss in your paragraph and how it connects back to your thesis. Then you provide some historical evidence, and you got to make sure that this is specific, and you want to provide as many specific examples as possible. Even if you're slightly unsure about the details of a certain historical event, still include it in your essay because you won't be docked for any slight errors in your historical evidence. It's better to include it and take the chance that it's correct and gain more points for it. So unless you say anything blatantly wrong, you're not going to be marked down for incorrect evidence in your essay. And then you want to analyze how the evidence substantiates your thesis. Basically, this is connecting your evidence to your thesis. Finally, the conclusion paragraph. Now, you don't have to do a conclusion, but Frank and I, like to use a conclusion for earning points on synthesis. And you can either modify or extend your thesis, or you can incorporate in an additional category of analysis that was not specified in the prompt. So this means that if the prompt's asking about politics and economics, you start talking about the social realm. And if you do choose to get synthesis using that second option, you probably don't want to do it in your conclusion. You want to do it during the body. But Frank and I like to do the third option for synthesis. We like to connect the topic to other historical periods, and this is great in the conclusion. So in our example essay, we earned our point for synthesis by connecting the Mexican-American War to the later Civil War. Anyways, Frank, that about concludes it.
Sounds good.
All right, Frank, let's talk strategy.
Sounds good, Abe. So we're looking right now at the page that the College Board would have actually given us this time in May last year, when we had the option of 2 different FRQs to answer. The first one dealt with the 7 Years' War, and the second one dealt with the Mexican-American War. Now, I think we can both agree that the 7 Years' War one is a bit easier, the Mexican-American War being a bit more obscure. But today, our example deals with the Mexican-American War, because we wanted to tackle the harder of the 2 issues. So, what are the first things you should do when you see and read these 2 prompts? You should first think of which one you have more evidence for. After all, grading is largely based off preponderance of evidence, as Abe just explained. The one that you can base most off your evidence is the one you're going to get a better grade on. So most of the time, that's going to be the 7 Years' War one. But for the sake of argument, let's look to the Mexican-American War and our example. We start off with a quote at the very start, and this is because you should have a couple quotes in mind just to start off your essays. But the key thing you should do upon reading the prompt for the first time is write down every single bold term, key event, and person that you could have ever imagined or remembered for that prompt. That is the first thing you should do as soon as you read both of those two topics. And then you can really just compare which one you have more evidence for. So going back to our example, we start with a quote and then we cycle through some historical analysis to our thesis. Yes, Abe?
Frank, I have a question. Should I try and categorize my evidence while I'm writing it down, or what should I do?
That's an excellent question. The key thing about writing down evidence is that it should not be categorized right at the onset. You should be able then to look back upon all the evidence you've written down and really see which one of the two categories, the evidence for the 7 Years' War or the evidence for the Mexican-American War, which one of those two fits best into 3 different paragraphs. So let's say you have a lot more evidence for the 7 Years' War, but you can really only think of it supporting 1 point. Well, clearly a 1-paragraph essay isn't going to get you that 5. That's the critical thing.
Could I do a 2-paragraph or a 4-paragraph essay?
It's certainly true that you can do 2 main points and then have an introduction, point number 1, point number 2, and then a conclusion. That always works, but 1 point simply isn't going to cut it. So you need to have diversity among the evidence that you provide. And that's why we look to the Mexican-American War example. One crucial strategic move that we do in our first body paragraph is use what's called a concession. Concessions are incredibly useful for any AP history test you take because they allow you to use 1 point on the other side. So you don't actually have to think of 3 points all for the same side. Instead, you get 1 for the other side and 2 for the side that you support. They're incredibly useful and they actually show the reader that you have a more adept knowledge of the subject matter, because you can propose evidence on both sides of the issue and still come across with your point presented eloquently. So check out our FRQ example, which is going to be linked underneath this video. If you have any questions about it, we showcase all of the things that Abe was talking about in that very interesting PowerPoint of his.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions.
And make sure to check out our website at www.socialsciencesyndicate.com.
As always, we'll catch you guys next time.
Give me that swing, give me that swing.